Well, good evening, everybody, and let's get tonight's show on the road. I'm Jonathan Anderson, and I welcome you to tonight's evening at Egan. Juneau's government, should we throw it out and start over? Now, this is my first, even though I've been here 12 years, this is my first evening at Egan, and those of you who know me know how shy I can be. So I hope you'll be kind to me and treat me well, and we'll see what happens at the end of this. I hope we're going to have some good questions and discussion. Now, before I get started, I have my 90-year-old mother in Sun City, Arizona I gave her the link to tune in, check that she had the flash stuff, so she should be watching. So I want to say, hi, Mom. We're glad you're here watching your little boy. As I said, I'm Jonathan Anderson, and professor of public administration at UAS and a member of the Juneau Assembly since 2005. I got my PhD in public policy from Indiana University, and I'm really pretty much of a political junkie. And this was a cartoon that my friend and MPA graduate, Tony Newman, Toe, wrote in early on in time. This was actual factual. It was at the end of this big, long discussion on the road, and we'd been having hours of testimony and everything. And for whatever reason, in the assembly comments at the end, I had went on a bit about the nature of democracy or something like that. And this was perfect. But I am a political junkie, and I love this stuff, which brings us to the subject of tonight's talk. We have an election coming up next Tuesday. Actually, you can vote right now, or actually the daytime. But there's some big issues on the ballot. We'll elect some new assembly and school board members. We will have a proposition. We'll decide whether to increase our property taxes a little bit to renovate Auk Bay Elementary School right over here. Vote yes. It's a good one. And we have this very non-controversial Ballot Proposition No. 2, which I will refrain from editorial comments on because I wrote a my turn in the paper today, and you can read that. So we're not talking about that tonight. But you know, there's going to be a Prop 3 on the ballot. And this is an interesting one. Most people aren't aware of it, will see it and go, huh? And it says, shall there be a charter commission to amend or revise the charter? You know, what the heck is that all about? The Borough Charter is our Constitution. It sets up our government, and it begins a little bit like the Constitution, like our U.S. Constitution. We, the people of the greater Juneau-Douglas area, exercising the powers of home rule granted by the Constitution of the state of Alaska, in order to provide for local government responsive to the will of the people and to the continuing needs of the community, do hereby ratify and establish this charter of the city and borough of Alaska. And then there's 30 or 40 pages of lots of other stuff. And buried in the charter, in section 14.4, it says every 10 years, we have to ask the citizens if they want to set up a charter commission to amend or review the charter. And if a majority of you all vote yes, we'll have actually another election, and we'll elect 9 charter commissioners to study and change and do whatever they want to propose to change the charter. Conceivably, they could toss the whole thing out. Why would we want or not want to do that? And I'm going to take some time tonight to talk about what this is all about and a little bit about how local government is different around the country. And then we'll get into the kinds of changes we could make if we so chose, and what it would mean for us as a democratic society. Come on and have a seat, Marie. Now, the first thing to remember is that we can always propose amendments. It's not just every 10 years. We can always propose amendments one by one. Either the Assembly can or Citizens Initiative. But if we form a charter commission whose job it is to revise the charter, it makes it a lot more likely that changes will happen. A lot of changes. A vote for the charter commission is really a vote, an expression that you want change. And not just change in policies. This is not about changes, how much money we spend here and there. This isn't about changes in whether we fund Eagle Crest or have smoking laws or build a bridge. It's a call to change how we make our collective decisions here in Juneau. It'd be a call to re-examine whether democracy is working or not. That's a serious question. You know, we did this once at the national level. If you hearken back to your high school civics, back when this country was founded, we had that first thing called the Articles of Confederation. And after a little rebellion called Shays' Rebellion, they decided they had to strengthen, they wanted to amend the Articles. And so all the colonies sent delegates to amend the Constitution so we could have a stronger central government. And instead, they tossed it out entirely and wrote up a totally new document, which is our Constitution today. So many people are a little bit leery of a constitutional or charter convention because of all the things that could happen. And we've never done it in the United States. We've never had one for the U.S. Constitution, and we've never had one here in Juneau. And in fact, when this came up the last time, 10 years ago, 2000 on the ballot, it was defeated by a 2-to-1 margin. And I wouldn't be overly surprised if that was the case this time too, but that's going to be up to you. Now, interesting, the state of Alaska has the same clause in its constitution. Every 10 years, we'll ask the citizens whether there's a charter commission. And they have to ask that, and they'll do it in 2012. And I find that very interesting. I wonder if it has something to do with the Mayan calendar and the end of time. But 2012, it will be on the ballot if we get to November of that year. So what do you think? You know, you've seen the blogs. Everybody thinks government is inefficient, ineffective, doesn't represent the people. So let's throw it out. Let's smash the tablets. Let's call a mulligan. Let's do a do-over. Let's change it all. What would that look like anyhow? How do we want to govern ourselves? How do we want to make decisions? Most of us want some kind of government by the people. But, how do you get that? How do you get how do you build an effective democracy? Now, democracy means literally rule by the people, the demos, the Greek word demos, rule by the people. But that's a lot easier just said in a word than done. And some people will always say, wait a minute, we're not a democracy, we're a republic, which is just quibbling about semantics because a republic is simply a representative democracy as opposed to a direct democracy. It's democratic rule regardless. We'll come back to that one in a moment. We all have different ideas about how things should be done. How do we make our decisions? We have different ideas about what we should do, how we should do it, what policies we should have, where we should spend money. We'd have to come to a decision. We got a problem. We disagree. And we disagree a lot. And so you've got this sense of how can we come to a collective decision in a setup where everybody's equal, where there's no brute force, where nobody has any more votes than anybody else, one person, one vote. How can we do that? And it isn't simple. It's complicated, messy, confusing, and we've got problems with it. Look in the U.S., we have the powers of interest groups and campaign finance issues. This year, with the census, we're going to redistrict, and that's going to be a big can of worms. Democracy, as we practice it, has a lot of problems. And in fact, Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for every other kind that's been tried. So what's the big deal, you say? Let's just vote. In fact, that might work in what we talked about, a direct democracy where all citizens literally vote on every little thing. Elections every week. Doesn't that sound like fun? Everybody who shows up can vote. Everybody who comes down can vote on every little policy. You know, and that might even be kind of interesting. We all pile into Centennial Hall and vote on everything. Actually, officially, we can't quite do that under the state law of Alaska here, which says we have to have an assembly. But they don't limit its size, which is interesting. Presumably, we could have an assembly of, 1,000, 10,000, who knows, whatever we chose to do. But most of us in the U.S. are more comfortable with a representative democracy. We vote on people who represent us. City council or assembly, state legislature, U.S. legislature, Congress. And we really don't want to have to keep up with every little thing that goes on in government. We want somebody else whose job it is to focus on those details so we don't have to. And so we can yell at them when they don't do what we want them to do. So why not have a single election? I want to be efficient here, okay? Democratic, we're going to elect one person, the CEO, who, president, call him whatever you want. Let's set their term for 10 years, who knows, for life. What efficiency, no partisan politics, no Congress, no political maneuvering, and it might be efficient, right? None of this arguing and dithering about party politics. Save our tax dollars. And to some, that might sound like a good idea, as long as that one leader is perfect, benevolent, virtuous, brilliant, high integrity, and always agrees with me. But we aren't too sure we want all of our Democratic eggs in one basket. No matter how efficient that might seem, we're not sure we trust people. We're not even sure we trust ourselves, right? James Madison was one of the main authors of the Constitution, and in one of his Federalist Papers, he wrote an oft-quoted passage that is as true today as it was then. And I want to read it. And he said, pardon the sexist language, but listen to the point. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men, over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. A dependence on the people is no doubt a primary control on government, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. Madison understood human nature. He knew we would never have perfect rulers or perfect government. So we had to create a system where human imperfections were controlled. The founders had enough of rules by kings and so-called divine rulers. They were frightened of concentrated power. And so they fragmented it. They established the proverbial checks and balances to prevent one person or a branch of government for taking over everything or asserting all sorts of power. They institutionalized inefficiency and gridlock. They did it on purpose. They were suspicious of efficient government. Efficient government gets things done quickly at lower cost, but what is done is often the will of the few or the one. And our experience is that men and women aren't angels, that actually power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, other countries, by the way, other democracies are not nearly as suspicious of power as we are in the United States, and they structure their government accordingly. One of the biggest differences between democracy in the U.S. and other democracies is that we in the U.S. separate executive and legislative power. We have an elected president and an elected Congress, and this is not the way parliamentary government democracy works. In Canada or the United Kingdom or Australia or New Zealand or Israel, in most all the other European democracies, the head of government is simply the head of the legislature, kind of like the Speaker of the House. They don't have a separately elected president or executive in most parliamentary governments. They do in some others. There's some mixed ones. But most of them don't. They have a prime minister who's just elected by their little district and whatever they are, and then the party elects them as the party leader. If the chief executive is the legislative majority leader, when that leader proposes something, it's the proposal of the legislative majority. There's no splitting of power, no checks and balances. What they propose is passed. I've got up here my nice picture of Prime Minister Stephen Harper of Canada, who is the one in charge. There's no gridlock. There's no gridlock in Canada. When the majority party proposes legislation, it's passed. That's it. Well, on top of that is that most democracies either don't have two legislative houses, they just have one, or one of them is very weak. They sometimes they'll have a senior house, but a pretty weak one. And why do we have two equally powerful bodies, the Senate and House? Why not a single legislature? By the way, we do have one state that does that. Nebraska does that. It'd be much quicker, much less political grandstanding, much more efficient, get things done. Why did the founders want to make government inefficient? And it's because they were afraid of the abuse that might result from too much efficiency, from too much power. Now, the first states in the United States took that concept of fragmentation deeply to heart. And down south in the lower 48, if many of you understand how government's done there, they elect lots of people at all levels of government. Each elected official has their own democratic power base, and they can't be forced to give in to the will of any other authority, like a governor. At the state levels, there's elected attorney generals, elected state treasurers, elected secretaries of state, elected state school superintendents. Sometimes the lieutenant governor is elected separately from the governor and can be of a different party. Arizona elects a state mining inspector. Texas elects a commissioner of agriculture and a railroad commission, and other states elect a controller. They elect their state boards of education. They elect their university board of regents, all of which means they have separate power. On their own, they're not able to be coordinated by any one central power. And at the local levels, they do the same thing there. Again, if you know down there, we elect sheriffs and treasurers and auditors and city clerks and judges and sometimes, literally, the dog catcher. None of them beholden to anyone but the people who elected them. None of them have to follow a central authority. Power is fragmented, dispersed. Is that fragmentation of power good or bad? Inefficient for sure. And I guess it really depends on how suspicious you are of human nature. Here's a crucial issue for government organization. This is it. Should we unify or fragment? Should we strengthen or weaken? Concentrated power is much more efficient than fragmented, but it's also much more likely to be abused. Now, I mentioned the early states, fragmented power all over the place. But when Alaska became a state in '59, it was part of a swing to the other end of the pendulum. We got a sense that too many cooks, too many people in charge spoiled the broth. We wanted We wanted to defrag government. We wanted more efficiency and less politics. In Alaska, we only have a single state elected official. Yes, lieutenant governor's elected, but it's on the same ticket. One vote, one main central authority. A unitary executive, as we call it, rather than a plural executive. And they have the power to hire and fire most state officials. Most state officials have to do what they tell them to. They're the single power. We sometimes temper the concentration by requiring confirmation from the legislature, but the power is still unitary. Now, it's interesting at the state level in Alaska, some of you may know that in recent years, there's been talk about amending the state constitution to allow an elected attorney general. And the concept, let's think about that for a moment. What difference does it make if the attorney general was elected and not appointed by the governor? The result is who he or she obeys, who they're beholden to, who hires and fires them, who's the boss. Is it the governor or the people? Calls for an elected attorney general argue that fragmenting power, setting up an independent power, is the only way the laws can be equally enforced without partisan political bias. We want to get rid of partisan political bias from the incumbent partisan elected governor. They say the law should be separate from politics. And opponents say, but that's just going to fragment government more and make it inefficient. The same theme that we started our country with. So, is power too concentrated in Alaska? Does the governor have too much power? Should the Department of Law or the Department of Public Safety or maybe the university be separate from the political control of the state legislature and of the governor? Now on Tuesday, we started all this at the national, sort of worked down to the state. And on Tuesday, though, we've got a city election, a local election. And but the issues there are really the same in terms of our governing structure, the charter. And structure does matter. If we set it up one way or another, different people will have different power, more or less. So let's get back to that issue of democracy. Democracy, one way to put it, is that it means people are represented. It means you are represented. And yet I say that word and I go, what the heck does that really mean? What does represented mean? Does it mean that my point of view is the law, gets passed as the law? Obviously not. Things would be a lot different. Does it mean that somebody in the government agrees with me and supports my feelings? If I'm a Republican, does Obama represent me? If I was a Democrat under Bush, did he represent me? I know technically they're supposed to, but one of them doesn't believe the things that I do. Am I represented if nobody in power supports my beliefs? Again, that's just what does represented mean? Most people will say, oh, it means you get to vote. But here's the big question. Who represents the losers? You maybe say we have minority rights, but the minority rights pretty much are the individual rights and freedoms in the Bill of Rights. They're not about who makes public policy. The winners do that. We say we believe in majority rule, but if it means some people never get their views considered, is that democratic? In order to make it so that somebody represents my views, meaning somebody thinks the way I do is part of the policymaking structure, we can jiggle around electoral structures. Now we're getting down to the level of the city. We can do some things differently that will make sure that more people's views are represented in the policymaking structure. And let's talk about some examples here. And We're going to get a little bit technical, but the devil is always in the details here. First phrase, the first term I'm going to use is something called district size. How big is the voting district? Who does the representative represent? Seems innocuous, but it's not at all. The President of the United States, their district is the entire United States. Everybody votes for them, and the President technically represents everybody. The districts for U.S. senators are the states. They represent the entire state. The districts for U.S. representatives are based on population, somewhere around up to 1 million or so. We only have one in Alaska, but other states, many, depending on the population. But each state gets at least one. Now, in the state legislature, you've got the state representatives with the smallest districts, and you have the state senators with a bit larger districts. Kathy Munoz is the representative for the Valley and out the road. Beth Kurtula is the representative of downtown and Douglas. And Dennis Egan, though, has the larger district because he represents all of Juneau. So you got to think with me on this a little bit. What difference does it make if you have one big district or many small ones? And it does make a difference. What does a representative do? The reality. Well, you know what it is? They get stuff for the population they represent. A representative tries to get money spent in their district, and they represent the views and the desires of that segment of population. We like our representatives when they get us stuff. Well, why not elect state legislators who represent the whole state at large? Why not just have all our state legislators elected at large by everybody in the state? What difference do you think it would make if Representative Munoz and Kurtula and Senator Egan had to be elected by the entire state and not just their districts in Juneau? Do you think their positions would be different? Do you think they would fight as hard for the capital to remain in Juneau? Do you think they would work as hard for Juneau to get various projects to represent Juneau? Creating a district structures the representative to work for that particular area and those particular people. But we don't do that in the Juneau local government. In the Juneau local government, in the city borough of Juneau, we have a single district. The whole borough. The whole borough elects everyone at large. We don't have to do it this way. We could change this. Not every municipality does. We could have each of our assembly members elected by a geographical district and represent that district. We could have a Douglas rep and a North Douglas rep and a couple of downtown, 4 or 5 Valley and out the road rep, and each segment of the borough would be represented, have their opinions represented in the policymaking assembly. And by the way, we could have more representatives too. As I mentioned before, we could have more than 9. So what difference does this make? If I represent the Mendenhall Valley, and in fact, not just the Mendenhall Valley, from Glacier Highway up to Stephen Richards and between Riverside and Loop Road, if that's my district, I don't much care what goes on in Douglas and downtown. In fact, if Douglas or downtown gets stuff and I don't, for my district, my voters will probably throw me out. If I want to satisfy them, the ones who are going to elect me, I better get stuff for them, represent them. It's the same at state and national levels. Do you want your representatives to represent the whole borough or one part? Same questions there for the state. Do we want our representatives to represent a district or the whole state? Now, our tendency is to say we want representatives of Juneau to represent Juneau, but we're also a lot of people more said, oh, okay, for the Juneau as a whole, we want at large. We don't want them representing some segment of Juneau. It's interesting. And I'm not saying one way is better than the other. I'm just saying it makes a difference, and we have a choice. And this is a bigger issue, however, if you have a really heterogeneous population and you think you're a minority. If you think you're a minority of some kind and your group, who mostly live in one part of town, is not well represented, never elect somebody. They're all elected at large, and the majority culture, group, race, whatever, always elects their people, and you never get anybody in the policy process. If the beliefs of your group always are outvoted by the majority, you'll want smaller districts so you can have somebody that represents you. Juneau made a decision in 1970 to become a consolidated city and borough. We had the city of Douglas, and we had the city of Juneau, and we had a borough, and we mushed it all into one. We became a consolidated government. And it made a decision at that point, when we wrote the charter, which we can change, to have one single district, just the whole borough, and 9 assembly members elected at large by everyone. We did say, and this is what confuses a lot of people, that some of them have to live in different parts of the borough. So we have seats, we have a valley seat and a downtown seat and some at-large seats, but they're still voted for at large. It's just a way to make sure that people at least live in different parts of town. We want the local representatives for the state and national. We want districts. Why not have those local districts at the municipal level? Another political sciencey term that I get us to, district magnitude, and it's sort of related to district size. It means how many representatives represent that district. All our state legislators have a district magnitude of 1. 1 district, 1 representative. U.S. senators have a district magnitude of 2 because there's 2 representatives for their district, for the state. The Juneau has established a single district with this magnitude of 9. 1 district, 9 representatives. Is that the right number? Wow. How many should we have? We don't have to. At larger districts, either one. Should we have fewer? More efficient, remember. If we have maybe 2, should we have 50? What difference would it make if we had 1 or 2 assembly members versus 15 or 20 or 50? Certainly, the more representatives you have, just think about it, the larger the group it is, obviously, the more difficult it is to come to a decision about anything. The larger the number that have to make the decision, the harder it is to come to that. Power is fragmented. Things would move a lot quicker and more efficiently if we just had 1 or 2 representatives. Just elect the mayor and that's it. Connected to the district magnitude is how we elect our members. And again, I know this is getting a little wonky here, but it is really interesting. We do it differently for the assembly and the school board. For the assembly, even though we run as at-large representatives, we have set seats. We have races for this seat. So we've got 3 people running for the valley seat, and the downtown and at-large seats are unopposed. 3 different elections. Every time, we have 3 different elections. With the school board, however, you've got a single election. Isn't this interesting? Just a single election, 2 seats are up every year, but in their case, everybody runs against each other, and you just take the top 2 vote getters. Come in third, you don't get a seat. Why do we do it that way? What is this difference here? In general, the more seats that are competed for in a single election, the more likely that some group might have an ability to elect their candidate in focusing all their efforts on one person. Even if they come in third, even if they came in second, they could still get a seat. Do we feel, this is a crucial question, do we feel there's unrepresented groups in Juneau? And if so, who are they? Where are they? We could, if we thought that, construct an electoral system that would find a way to extend representation to a subgroup of some sort, if that's what we wanted. My next one is the majority plurality. Majority is, should we say that you need 51% to be elected, majority rule? Or just more than anyone else who is running, just more votes than anyone else? We have plurality. You don't have to, you could get 30%, 20%, get a low, as long as it was more than anybody else. So the more people that were running, it might be that the winner just got, 30% or something like that, and they would be called the winner. We don't have to do it that way. We could say majority. You got to have 51% because we want everybody, we want a majority to be represented at least. Do we want to make sure the winning candidate has that majority? Well, the same question came up with the state of Alaska back in 2002 in a way. We had a question of, because if you said you got to have a majority and nobody did, what do? Well, usually you take the top two candidates and have a runoff election. It's expensive, takes another election, people don't like it that much. In Alaska in 2002, we tried to propose something a little bit different. We said, we're going to have something called an instant runoff. And what that was that when you voted for the governor, let's say, statewide office, you would put choices, your first choice and second choice. Okay, I know you got to wrap your head around this. So your first choice and second choice. Let's say you have three people. Let's say, for instance, you have an election with a Joe Miller, a Lisa Murkowski, and a Scott McAdams. You have three people running. None of them get over 50%. If you allowed what's called preferential voting, give them choices, then whoever got the bottom number of votes, didn't get enough votes, would be dropped off, and all the people who voted for that person, we'd take their second choice votes and redistribute them to the other two. And then one of those two would have the 51% because all the votes had been distributed among two. A lot of people didn't understand, it was defeated. A lot of people didn't understand it. And in fact, there was, I would say, in my opinion, and this is just mine, that the Democrats in particular were opposed to that because they saw in a state that has a Republican majority in many cases that this would offer them a chance to say, well, I'll vote for one of those two, Miller and Murkowski, and I'll have the other one as my second choice, and allow them to, even if one of the two didn't get the majority, the votes would be redistributed back to the one Republican, and they'd be elected. Whereas now, there's a lot of soul-searching going on. If I vote for here or here, will this fragment the vote? Will it cause someone who I don't want to be elected to be elected? Now, if you really wanted, and we didn't want to do that, we decided we voted it down here. If you really wanted to make sure smaller groups would have representation, you could construct what they do in a lot of European democracies, what they call proportional representation. And that simply says you run by parties, you get representation by the number of votes you get. If you get 10% of the votes, you get 10% of the seats in the legislature. You get 50% of the votes, you get 50% of the seats in the legislature. Just another format. All right, a few more different concepts we have in our structure. One of the things we have in our charter that we don't have to have is we say the elections are all going to be nonpartisan, not party. Unlike the state or federal system, we don't run on a party designation, and the assembly isn't organized by party rules. We could have the same divisions there, and we'd have the same partisan politics stuff that goes on at state and national levels. We'd have choices of who is chair of committees run by who is the majority party. We'd have different types of, we'd have voting 2 and 4 issues on the basis of who the party of the proposer was rather than the issue that we're being talked about. I particularly, and most of the stuff I say, I don't profess an opinion, but this one I do. I think that the nonpartisan nature of this is a good thing. It forces us to vote for the issues rather than vote on party loyalties. And even though there are different ideologies out there, and obviously we know who's conservative and who's liberal and all these things, we're still arguing and voting on the issues, and the party jockeying doesn't happen. Another thing in the charter tells us how long a representative's term will be. How long should it be? How long should a term of office be? A year? 2, 3, 5, 6, 10? Actually, the state does tell us, they don't give us unlimited choice there. They say we can only go up to 4 years. We could have a 4-year term. But we also could have a 1-year term. We could have every 1 year, everybody's reelected. And when people are going to be elected quicker, they're more attuned to the sways of public opinion. That's why the House of Representatives with 2-year terms is more attuned to the sways of the current feelings of the day than and the national level, and senators who are 6 years and who don't have to be running constantly. In Juneau, the assembly members are 3 years, and is that a good choice? Again, could we have shorter terms? I know that assembly members hate running for election. We'd rather it be the longer the better. But citizens want an opportunity to throw the bums out sometime, to pick a fresh face, and we could change that. We could change that and say everybody in the assembly has to go up every year. I mean, we got the election anyway. Why not have everybody have to go every year? Oh, we'd hate that. Ugh. Connected to term lengths are term limits. The term length was how many years is a term. The term limit is whether or not you say you can only run for a certain number of terms. State doesn't have a say on that. We could, in fact, many parts of Alaska, there are no term limits. You could run again and again as long as the people elected you. And that's democratic. But in 1992, we decided that Juneau would have a 3-term limit. 9 years, 3-3-year terms. I could see this argument. People against term limits say, why shouldn't we be able to elect the same person over and over if we like them? Why shouldn't we be able? That's democracy. Once again, it comes down to a suspicion of power. We know there's power in incumbency. Incumbents are normally reelected again and again, despite exceptions. We keep voting for them. We give them low ratings in the survey polls, and we vote for them. Because after all, it's usually our representative is okay. It's all those other bums that are bad. Name recognition seems to be the main determinant in our voting. Term limits limit our democratic choice, but we've established them because we're suspicious of the continuous power. Now, while these little rules that I've been going through do make a difference, they still might be considered sort of details to many. When people look at how to organize government, local government, one of the biggest issues is the choice of what we call a strong mayor or a mayor-council government. Excuse me, strong mayor or council-manager government. Juneau has a council-manager government. Anchorage has an elected strong mayor. Sullivan mayor now, Begich before then. They are the chief executives. In Juneau, a professional with a background in management runs the day-to-day organization of the municipality's business rather than the elected mayor, rather than an elected politician. We elect the chief executive of the state, the governor. We elect the chief executive of the nation, the president. But in council manager local government, we say no, we're going to hire a manager. We want to put politics out of it. Council manager government was first established in U.S. communities early 1900s, a reaction against corrupt city politicians that were just like Bell, California, getting rich all over the place on the taxes of citizens. When politicians are able to direct money flows, there's the possibility, and some might say the likelihood, of corruption. The main purpose of council-manager government was to put the day-to-day management in the hands of the professional manager rather than an elected politician. The elected assembly makes policy decisions, and they can fire the city manager when they want. And we say we want professionals rather than amateurs to control city government. Or do we? You know, what difference does it make? One can easily argue it's less democratic. You aren't able to choose the person who's running your government. You might claim the unelected manager has less reason to respond to citizens who rap on the door. All they have to do is be responsive to 9 assembly members, not to all the citizens. An unelected city manager is more likely to focus on efficiency than to focus on politics. Here's the issue we talked about at the beginning, this tension between democracy and efficiency. What do we want more of? Democracy means politics. That's what it is. The struggle to advance your position over others. Arguments for a council manager government say a professional manager makes better policy decisions because they're less political. Arguments for the strong mayor say the city managers are by definition status quo bureaucrats. Don't make bold moves, aren't able to make broad changes. Those who advocate for the strong mayor form usually believe that they can more effectively influence public policy if the chief executive is an elected official. They think a strong mayor government is more democratic. One final sort of democratic flavor on this I want to look at for the moment is the power of a mayor. Because we do elect a mayor in Juneau. Mayor Botello is our mayor, current mayor. We elect him, he's a mayor, but it's real different than Anchorage. How much power does this so-called weak mayor have? We can make him simply one of the legislators who chairs the meetings, which is usually in many ways what that elected weak mayor is. Do we want the mayor to have more power than the other assembly members? Do we want somebody who has more power to sort of herd the cats? Small rule changes in the charter can influence that. In second-class cities in America, in Alaska, the mayor is actually elected by the council members, not by the individuals. The council members select from among themselves, like a parliament, who will be their leader. They don't have, so the mayors there are beholden to the other assembly members, not to the citizens directly for the mayoral position. And they have to be cautious of offending their fellow assembly members. They can be deposed if they don't get along with their colleagues. Direct election of a mayor, of a weak mayor, as we do in Juneau, gives him a little more power because he's got his own power. I was elected, I served my term, and the people will elect me again if they want me. I don't have to kowtow to the other assembly members. This direct election gives him a little bit of a mandate and protection. Now, in some municipalities, the mayor has another power, which we could give him here, a much greater power. He has a veto power. We could give our mayor, if we want the mayor to be stronger than he is, even though he's a weak mayor, we could give him a veto power. He could make it so that he could say that the legislation doesn't pass unless there's a 2/3 or 3/4 override. If you're feeling you want somebody who has more power as a leader, there's gradations you can go. You can give him a veto. We can go to strong mayor government if that's what you think we need in Juneau. Do we want more concentration for efficiency and sweeping changes, or do we want more fragmentation to protect against abuse of power by strong interests? Okay, one more little thing here that I want to talk about is enterprise boards. And just a couple more pieces here, and we'll open up for questions and comments. What we have in Juneau, we have created separate governing boards outside the city manager for big parts of what's under city government. The airport, the hospital, docks and harbors, Eagle Crest. While the Borough Assembly is in charge of them all, we have created these citizen-appointed enterprise boards to govern them. And those boards elect an executive director, which is kind of like the city manager, except it's just for that piece. They control the budget for those entities. As I said, they're not under the city manager. And they are also, with the exception of Eagle Crest, required to balance their own budget. And they don't get tax dollars. No property, no sales tax. They have to raise it themselves. So where do they get it? Obviously, user fees. Docks and Harbors has got to charge you for the slips. Airport's got to charge passengers and carriers. Hospitals got to charge patients. They got to pay for their own way through user fees. And they do. Eagle Crest, by the way, pays for about 80% of their way. The city subsidizes about 20%. The creation of these enterprise boards gives them, as I said, a degree of independence too. They can do, actually the reality is they can do pretty much what they want to do as long as they come in with a balanced budget, unless a lot of people are screaming and complaining. If we get a lot of complaints about something, we'll turn our attention to, I'm talking about the assembly, we'll turn our attention to it and think about it, talk about it, investigate. Mostly, if they turn in a balanced budget, great, they do whatever. So the creation of this independent organization acts to kind of depoliticize even more. Those entities aren't as subject to the electoral pressures, the democratic pressures, the political pressures of that the elected officials are. Would management be more efficient and effective if it was all under the city manager? The charter again governs this. So this is my overall summary on this. What we've created in Juneau, the way it is now, we're set up to be a city with much less politics governing our decisions than other cities. And these are the elements that control this. We have a council manager government rather than the elected mayor leader. That depoliticizes stuff a bit. We've got a weak mayor who doesn't have veto power, just has a vote like anybody else. Nobody has to go and get the mayor on their side to pass things. They just got to get 5 other members. We have nonpartisan elections. Specifically, you can't run as a party member, and we don't run the assembly as parties. We have term limits. We have at-large voting, which means we're reducing conflict because we're not representing individual districts fighting with each other and competing for dollars. Everybody represents everybody. And we have this major infrastructure run by citizen-appointed boards. All these are barriers against elected officials asserting major power. They limit us. The structure is set up to limit politics and political power. And we end up with probably, my judgment would be a stable, consistent, balanced government, but one that's not very aggressive about change. Whether that's good or bad is the judgment call. On October 5th, you're going to vote on whether you want a charter commission to amend the Constitution. As I said before, people tend to be nervous about voting for a commission, given they know they can they can have individual changes. To open up the whole thing, people get nervous about. But a commission could address many issues at once rather than one by one. So your vote on this proposition October 5th is essentially an expression of whether you are basically satisfied with the government in Juneau, with the structure of our council manager government, or whether you think we'd better serve by starting over and trying to build up some different structure of democracy. Okay, before I go to questions. One little advertisement, one little PR thing. I just want to announce that in spring semester, I'm going to be offering, I've managed to get this through, to offer an undergraduate 3-credit elective called Citizenship and Social Action, How to Change the World. And in this class, we'll try to understand in greater detail the structures of power and change in Juneau and how individuals really can make a difference. And with that, I will close off this part of it and open for comments and questions. And I think, Yoko, you're going to be my microphone person. Really appreciate if you would wait for microphone to come to you so we can pick this up, because we are streaming it over the internet so my dear sainted mother can hear the questions. So we got one in the, Yoko, in the back row. There we go. And again, comments or questions, either one.
If the government, not only in Juneau but nationwide, changed to the system that you talked about, I think it's Charter Commission, where everybody votes on every little thing, who would be the people that would give the issues to vote for, and how would they decide which issues are important enough to vote for?
Great point. What you're talking about, if it was direct democracy, if it was a direct city, town hall government, everybody voted on everything. People have talked about it. People have talked about whether you could do it nationwide through the internet and get voting so that everybody could do that, or everybody who chose to vote. But it's a great question, because that's the subtle piece on there. Who decides what's on the agenda? Who decides what's going to be voted on? There would need to be some kind of manager structure that would put those issues out there, and that becomes a huge question of who decides what the issues are that will be voted, who frames the issues. So it's hard to say. I'm not familiar enough with the town hall meetings that do happen in some of the small communities in New England. I think they have an administrative officer, kind of like a city manager, who puts together an agenda and presents it to everybody to vote on in the council meeting.
In your opinion, what do you think the best way for that to happen would be? Like, would we vote for people to decide, or do you think we should?
Okay, you're asking the difference between representative democracy versus direct democracy, I think. Should we all vote on everything, or should we elect representatives? Is that what you're asking?
I was asking, in your opinion, in that situation where there's the question of who would who would create the issues or propose the issues, what do you think would be the best way to find those people?
I think that you're going to have to do it you'd have to have a manager who puts a professional manager who presents the issues to the people. You'd have to have that. I think it would be a government that was really controlled by the professional management too, because most of the people wouldn't have studied on the things. They wouldn't have the knowledge so much of it. Maybe some people would try to, but a direct democracy government sounds good, but it pushes a lot of power just into the hands of the hired staff. Down here then, and then back here. Right here.
Who is our city manager's supervisor? You mentioned that having a city manager who's hired and not elected removes some of that political influence.
The city manager is responsible only to the assembly. We hire the city manager, and we also actually hire the city attorney. Those are the only two people that we can hire and fire. So the assembly, the elected body, this was the thing back in the 19th century. The big issue of patronage is that legislators would hire and fire people themselves, and so lots of corruption in that system. Here, all we can do is hire and fire the city manager and the city attorney. We can't hire and fire anybody else. So it's the assembly that hires the city manager.
And then the boards that you talked about, say the Docks and Harbor Board, is citizen appointed?
Yes. They're assembly appointed citizen boards. What we have in the newspaper, every now and then you'll see boards and commissions that have openings, or you can go to the city website and just go to the boards and commission and the city clerk site and see what are opening positions, and you can apply for a lot of different boards. Besides the enterprise boards, we have about 30 other boards of all sorts of things. They're advisory boards, not a lot of power, but they do things like my good friends in the Human Rights Commission and make things, make things happen in good ways, but they don't have a whole lot of power. The enterprise boards control multi-million dollar budgets. We like the assembly. The assembly, we have new people coming on every year. We have terms for those enterprise boards too. The same 3-year terms that assembly members have. Same term limits. We put those on the enterprise boards as well. And so every year we appoint 3 more members to each board. We can reappoint the same ones up to 3 terms, or other people can apply and they will be interviewed by the assembly and we'll appoint somebody. If anybody's interested, they should get informed of when those boards come up and put your application in. One of the things, by the way, we always ask is, have you attended a something board meeting? You know, that's so. And if well, no. You know, and what your background is, why you think you'd be good to help run the airport or docks and harbors, and what your vision is of the future of that one. And so we want people who are somewhat knowledgeable and informed to be in those citizen boards.
And then does the board hire the
executive director of that particular board, yes. Okay, we had a question back in the middle up here. Yeah, you got to wait.
Thanks. My question was about, you said that if this proposition passed and there would then be a commission of some sort elected that would then investigate the possibility of changing government.
Right.
Would that commission's findings then be binding, or would we end up with another referendum?
No, there would be another election where we'd put it all back to the citizens and they'd vote on it. So there, the Charter Commission would simply propose how it should be changed. So you can imagine this would be quite a political journey because you'd have, to elect the 9 charter commissioners, we could either have a special election, which we don't like to do because it costs money, and everything, or we'd do it the next time, the next October, and we'd have it then, and then those 9 people would get together and they'd hold hearings. Oh, by the way, running for that, and it'd be same like running for the assembly. You got to go out and get 25 people to sign your petition and hand it in, and then you can run. And then people would vote for you, and you'd put your advertising out saying, vote for me because I'm smart. And to try and get people to select you for your bold ideas of how our city should be organized.
Yeah, I had a question about the enterprise boards and their funding. Is Eagle Crest is the only one that gets any money through the Borough Assembly?
Yes. Now, when you say through, I got to be careful there because the Assembly approves everybody's budget and in fact has to appropriate everything. We have to appropriate that they collected user fees. You know, they collected user fees, it's their user fee. We have to, in the budget, say that, okay, you can spend those user fees. They don't get, the thing is they don't get property tax or sales tax money. And even that's not an absolute because all of them could come and say, we've got a special project that we really need some assistance on. Docks and Harbors sometimes makes that point that they want to use marine passenger fees that the cruise ship guys pay for. Or they might propose to have a bond issue, a general obligation bond, where we borrow money from the citizens to pay for these things. So it's not absolute, but main thing is essentially they don't get taxes, they got to raise the money themselves.
So don't they have large bonds at this point, the Docks and Harbors and
They-
Airport?
You know, I don't know exactly what they have going. I don't think they have very much. And the hospital doesn't do the hospital's got enough money to fund all their renovations through their user fees. The airport's funded a whole lot by the feds. The Federal Aviation Administration collects money and gives us all the runway extension and the airport renovation. I mean, like 98% paid for by federal monies there. This young lady here.
Jonathan, I just wanted you to ask you about, you've talked about opening the whole charter up, but you can also propose amendments to the charter, isn't
Yes.
that correct? And
Do it
can you
one by
talk
one,
about-
one issue by one issue.
Yeah, talk about what it takes to do that.
Yeah, it is similar to any citizens initiative. Similar to any citizens initiative where you have to collect, I think it's 25% of equivalent to 25% of the vote in the last election. You got to collect you actually, I think you go in and there's something like 15 names just to request a petition, and then you get a petition and you go out and collect whatever, 1,000 names or something, or whatever the thing is, to get the amount that qualifies it to be put on the ballot, and then it gets put on the ballot. A lot easier to get it on through the assembly if you can convince the 9 people on the assembly rather than trying to do an election of the people. Citizens initiatives are tough, and they're restricted in many ways too. A citizens initiative can't be to appropriate money. So it could not have been a citizens initiative to this Prop 2 on the bridge, because that's appropriating money to build a bridge. It had to be an assembly proposition or nothing. So citizens initiatives are limited in many ways by state government and state laws, what you can or can't do. Have to be single issues, can't be about appropriating money. Other questions or comments or rants or raves?
This is a little off topic, but somebody mentioned bonds, municipal bonds, and I know a lot of times we'll see initiatives on the election asking us to vote on bonds, and I see more bonds coming on, but I never get the backstory of it, of what's our debt load, have we paid off the other bonds we voted for, how do you get that information?
Okay. First of all, I am very impressed with the transparency of the Juneau city government. If you make the effort, go to the city website, juneau.org, enormous amounts of information on there, including the complete budget, all departments, where the money's coming from, how much we're paying for staff here, and all the information about what we call the mill rate, which is the percentage we charge on property tax. The mill rate is composed of the regular, what we charge for city stuff, and what they call a debt service mill levy. And that's paying off the bonds. That debt service mill levy has remained it's been growing a little bit. I've been a little bit distressed because it's been getting a little bigger, but it's still only a couple of, I can't remember the exact one, but a couple of mills. The total mill has been fairly steady at around 10 point something or another for the past 6 or 8 years. The thing that I personally want to be careful of is just what this gentleman was saying, that we manage to only take on projects as others have been paid off. They're usually on a 15-year payoff. And as we do that, others, including the school district, are frustrated because they want more things on sooner, because they want more projects. And the fact is, we've been pushing back, we, the assembly, have been pushing back to them saying, we're not going to take it up so that mill levy keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We need to keep it at a stable level over time and have extended planning so things are coming on for the bond debt as things are coming off. So it's a debate. This gentleman over here.
I've heard you do community service for CCS. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that and how you think the public administration could help out more.
CCS, you're saying Catholic Community Services? Yes. Okay, Catholic Community Services, one of the programs they run is hospice, and I'm a hospice volunteer. That's a real separate thing. That's my own personal thing. I was doing that before I ran for the assembly. And I'm not sure what your question of how could public administration be more involved with that? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Like provide funding.
Okay. Indeed, this last year, we did what happens in the city budget cycle. Every year, sort of at the end of it, different groups come forward to say they want some extra money for this or that or the other. And the assembly has to decide, whether they'll fund those. And this past year was very difficult because we actually were pulling money from our reserve to pay the budget. We weren't running a balanced budget. And so to give anything to anybody was a real struggle. But we still gave, it was somewhere, I can't remember, 30 to 50,000 to hospice for doing that. They were like the one organization we did give to. So they have gotten some support. Others, we said no to a lot of others. Although anybody who's interested, a little elaboration, these boards and commission, there's another board that's two other boards, the Social Service Advisory Board and the Youth Activities Board. These are citizens boards that the assembly gives a pile of money to, hundreds of thousands of dollars to, and says, you run a grant process for Juneau. You evaluate grants and you award this money to people who propose good grants to get money. So you can actually be involved in deciding who gets money, when, where, and how for social service operations or for youth activities operations. And I do believe there's like 3 seats open on the Social Service Advisory Board. So there's open seats. And when there's open seats, they almost take anybody who applies, if you don't sound really weird. So, but anyways, I wandered around a little bit. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay. Other comments or questions? If not, well then thank you very much for coming here. I had a good time. You're pointing, did somebody have their hand up? Did you have your hand up and I missed you? No. Okay, all right. Thank you guys.